Big thanks to anyone who has placed an order for my frog mouth plushie. This is a charity event to help children with cancer. There are 48 hours left. If you still haven't placed your order, now is the time. Link in the description. Differently from the usual content on this channel, today I'd like to talk to you less as a YouTuber and more as a fully qualified school teacher and professional educator, drawing from about a decade of experience both teaching in school and also through the EU funds of university and research. In other words, this video is a comprehensive methodological analysis of the state of our current education system and how it's failing the current generation in its fundamental purposes and teaching mechanics. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and I think one of the main characteristics of this platform is my constant merciless attacks towards the incorrect representation of scientific, historical and linguistic data. And one could say that I've been doing this over a broad spectrum of sources and topics. However, the case that I would like to build today is the fact that the worst type of inaccuracy is the one displayed and connected to children's education, materials, teaching aids and curricula, kids being a very sensitive component of our social system. In an era of tumultuous superimposition of diametrically opposite political ideologies, ruthless strategies of population control and mass psychology are constantly employed by all factions. As a response, I shall henceforth present the need for a teaching method grounded on education studies as an empirical mechanism of knowledge acquisition based on factual evidence, which must be resilient to multiple external forces, including political pressure. I will now begin to systematically attack the current state of our education system in order to expose its flaws. My attack strategy will be divided into three sections. We will establish why some of the notions that are being presented are in fact false. We shall then discuss why teaching false notions to kids is detrimental to their development as free individuals and thinkers. Finally, we'll address the correct way to approach societal issues such as the caring and protection of minorities without infringing people's fundamental rights to access correct information. Schools should be a politically neutral environment where factual evidence is presented, working with and not against the parents in order to ensure impartiality and professionalism within the educational space. We shall now briefly discuss the theoretical claims that connect the understanding of teaching, children's education, and the theory of mind, which is the ability to predict and explain human behavior in terms of underlying mental states. Several test results seem to indicate that even preschoolers understand that not only teaching is an intentional activity, but it's based on a knowledge gap between the teacher and the students. Kids understand this very early on, which is one of the reasons why they tend to trust the teacher as they see him/her as a figure of authority. Children are thought to develop the understanding of diverse desires very early in life. Diverse desires meaning that they can realize that other people's desire may differ from our own. However, and this is crucial, belief understanding is thought to develop after desire understanding. In other words, the ability to recognize and appreciate that other people's beliefs can be different from one's own. Now, why is this relevant to the idea of we always have to make sure to teach factual truths to the kids? Because differently from a person's desires, one's beliefs can be false. A concept that young children are not equipped to appreciate. The ability to understand true beliefs and the ability to appreciate false beliefs does not develop in union. Moreover, studies suggest that children are competent at identifying ignorance in others before they become competent at identifying the false belief in others that result from the other person's ignorance. And this is just talking about neurotypical children. All of this, of course, has to do with the development of the brain, together with language development, cognitive delays, age, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior superior temporal sulcus, the precuneus and the amygdala. All of these are associated with theory of mind tasks and therefore render a child susceptible to beliefs in false teachings. And if someone tells you for whatever reason that no, a child can definitely tell apart reality from fiction, please keep in mind that children believe in Santa Claus who is flying on top of a sleigh while all of his elves are working in a factory. And there is also the Tooth Fairy. Therefore, the reason why I consider all of this dangerous is because it's a manipulation of historical reality that children are not equipped to recognize as a false belief. In other words, they will end up believing in a world that never happened. Are you okay with that? How knowledge and skills are imparted within the framework of our educational system is not the call of some social activists, but it's something that needs to be subject to the evaluations of professionals and the consent of the public. These are your kids we are talking about. Your voice and opinion matter. Not only teaching curricula need to be based on factual evidenced information, but they need to adapt their teaching strategies, taking into consideration theories of learning, understanding of students and their needs, the background and interest of individual students, not the spread of a political ideology over another. Utilizing new discoveries in science of learning and development may be applied to the factors that influence individual variations in learning, studying behavioral, cognitive or social emotional development in students, together with all the factors that result in variation in learning and developmental pathways. I will now present to you an example that has to do with the concept of inclusivity applied to the ancient world incorrectly, and how this has then found room within teaching materials, both for children but also for adults at an academic level. I'll follow it by an example in literature manipulation, but these are just examples, and the core concepts of this video can be applied to every single time and every single thing that is being taught to the kids that is not backed in factual evidence. Already on the net, there is a plethora of articles that describe, for example, ancient Rome as an inclusive and diverse political entity, purposely using this terminology to connect it to modern ideas of inclusivity, multiculturalism, and immigration policy and control. The assumption and premise of these articles is that the concepts of ethnicity and cultural identity were always seen as very positively by the Romans, and consequently the extension of Roman citizenship during the Republic and the Empire was empathetic in nature. The ancient Romans were open-minded, inclusive, free of prejudice, and welcoming to all, regardless of your ethnicity and cultural background. You will be welcome in the multicultural and multi-ethnic Roman Empire. And of course, the connection of this ideology together with children's education is the fact that it was represented several times into BBC cartoons that were then used as teaching aids for children. Let me make this 100% clear. The historical reality is that the Romans wanted to rule the world by any means necessary. The decisive political strategies through which Rome strengthened the basis of its rule are far in nature from the modern conceptualization of ancient ethnicities in connection with immigration and the integration of minorities within the social strata of modern nations. Philip V of Macedon spoke about the real intentions behind Rome's open citizenship strategy. In his letters to the inhabitants of the city of Larissa, he discusses the fact that the Romans tried to expand the number of citizens by accepting foreigners, in this particular case freed slaves, to increase Rome's power. This characteristic feature of Roman foreign policy is also discussed by Dionysius of Halicarnassus, according to whom the practice was implemented in Rome as early as the days of King Servius Tullius. Now, it's absolutely true that during the Roman period, membership into the Res Publica Populi Romani was not exclusive to citizens of Italy. But the reason why Rome adopted a policy of acceptance of other people from the outside into the Roman citizen body is because it was deemed preferable over having to quench constant rebellions by force. And even though Roman citizenship was indeed open to the subjugated, there were very strict conditions, as one would expect, since the real purpose behind it was the strengthening of the Roman Republic and subsequently imperial dominion. This is what evidence points out through the means of proper contextual analysis, not the modern idea of inclusivity. It is also important to note that regardless of the actual strategic reasons behind the opening of citizenship to other people, there were also members of the ruling class and political lawmakers that were against it. Although during the Roman Republic they were a minority, and during the Empire, well, you have the emperor and he has absolute power. There are also historical examples of what happens when citizenship is not enough to ensure loyalty to Rome, and what the consequences are of the failure of this political procedure and how Rome responds to it. Look at, for example, AD 9 and the whole very famous clash with the Cherushi people, the treachery of Arminius, the destruction of the legions of Varus. As popularly known, Arminius, who led the Germanic uprising, had not only received Roman citizenship from Augustus himself, but even had become a member of the Equester Ordo. Nevertheless, he broke his loyalty and friendship with Rome. And was the Roman state cool with that? Well, let's just put it this way. They made them pay. So, we Romans extend citizenship rights to you, civitas Romana. But if you rebel, or you don't conform to the strict requirements we force onto you, we will destroy everything you know and burn it to the ground. Doesn't exactly sound inclusive and empowering to me. Still, what happened with Arminius and Varus legions is the exception to the rule. In fact, the extension of Roman citizenship to the masses and the conquered worked like clockwork. The affiliation to Rome and its fundamental interests became functional for the majority of the new citizen, and even more so for their descendants. In other words, the children are born Roman, so they forget that they used to be the enemies and that their grandfathers fought the empire. They now serve it. And as a result, we can see through the sources that the affiliation to Rome via Roman citizenship led to a large stability into the provinces. Roman open citizenship was a political tool designed for a precise goal, but it does not mean that the Italian Romans didn't perceive themselves as superior over the barbarians. Roman discrimination against provincial, juxtaposed with Roman elite ethnicity, still remained. Although when it comes to the actual fabric of the senatorial class and how it changed over the centuries, I'll have to make a dedicated video. Also, what happened to those who didn't want to be a Roman, or perhaps didn't wish to fit into the very specific societal roles that were given to them by the Roman state? Were they respected as fully empowered, sovereign individuals? Well, Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar, didn't seem to think so when he cut the right hand of every single person who rebelled against him at the siege of Uxellodunum. In other words, Rome ruled through fear. Just like what they did to the escaped gladiators that were led by Spartacus. After defeating them in battle, they crucified thousands of them on the Appian Way. Let me paint you a mental picture of that. The Appian Way, the main route into the city of Rome from the south. Rome's acceptance of several conquered people into the fold of citizenship was not based on some modern idea of equality, equal right acceptance and inclusivity. It was a cold, methodical and calculated system designed to turn sworn enemies into loyal subjects. This basic axiom can be traced in different ways in Rome's history, during the Republic under Caesar from Augustus, but the fundamental principle remains the same. The goal of this political and legal openness was primarily to create a strong commitment to Rome and its rulers. The policy was intended to strengthen the loyalty of the people to Rome. This is why, 4 years ago, I decided to attack the BBC cartoon's attempt to foster representation in an overly inclusive way, creating a cartoon utilized as teaching material for children where they depict a kind, inclusive, and accepting ancient Rome, creating a world that did not exist. And to those who say, but these are just cartoons, relax bro. First, any parent's duty is to check what his children are exposed to. Most importantly, if you are familiar with history, specifically World War II, the powerful propaganda used by Germany between 1939 and 1945 specifically made use of propaganda cartoons. So yeah, I'll take them seriously. A similar problem appears with the censoring of literature in order to make it more inclusive and more politically correct, another instance of manipulation of the past for purposes other than the education and growth of the individual. So it is a fact that several children's authors have been and are continuing to be censored, labeled bigoted, and most importantly, doctored. The words that are deemed unacceptable or offensive are being replaced, changing the original work so it would conform to the modern sensitivities. There are several books that have undergone this process, and because they are then presented as new print runs, then the person who is reading the book doesn't even know that he's reading a book that was not written as intended by the original author. An example of this was done by the publisher Puffin, and we are talking about extensive changes, including entire passages not written by the author that are added to the work, and once again, on the basis of politically correct, non-offensive basis. Words are culled or removed completely. Now, what words are being removed? Well, for example, the adjective ugly for some reasons, but also words such as female, men. Now, how far back will this go? Will they rewrite Shakespeare, the writings of the ancients, Greek philosophers and Latin authors? Will they be deemed unacceptable for modern sensitivities? Will all of medieval literature be changed to fit modern ideologies? Where does it end? And this, the doctoring of the books without even telling you about it, is worse than banning books. Because at least a banned book can be sought for, obtained in different manners, but a doctored book containing words that the author never wrote, having changes that the author never intended, having a specific date in the past, but representing modern ideas that did not exist back in the day, it's a subtle tactic. and to those who are not aware of it, it will replace the original real world with a new false one. Consequently, the analysis of these mechanisms and interactions between real, actual, and empirical data is sensitive. The whole fallacy of this approach is that it uses subjects such as history or literature and even other subjects to teach inclusion, and in order to do so, it has to modify them. That happens because history, literature are not the appropriate subjects to do that, and there is a perfect school subject to do this, to explain to kids that it's imperative as members of a civilized society to refrain from behavior such as bullying, acting violently towards minorities. It's the subject called civics. That's where you teach how to be a decent individual in a more accepting society, not changing the past. However, I'll be 100% honest and transparent with you. The reason why they do not use civics and instead result into changing history and literature is the following. This is done in order to remove every sign of the previous opposing systems and replace it with their own. It is a political move, because if you remove your opposition from the memory of the past, pretending that it never existed. And when I say opposition, I also mean anything that just goes against the politically correct reality that you're trying to push. Then the only ideas left are your ideas. You remove options. And the reason why I attack it is not because I'm against an accepting world towards minorities. Not at all. It's because it has nothing to do with trying to create a more inclusive and accepting society. It's a strategy. And it is dangerous specifically for minorities. Because how can anyone understand why minorities struggle if you replace everything that has happened to them with what you think should have happened, because what actually happened offends you? While you delete everything that doesn't conform to your arbitrary ideas or what you perceive to be acceptable, how can you contribute new knowledge to a pressing issue in your respective field if the knowledge of what happened is removed and replaced? If it's not acceptable to show any form of slavery towards people that belong to minorities, even though that's exactly what happened and what we should study in order to avoid repeating it? How can you understand what racism means if you remove what happened and add a systematic replacement of historical figures of power with people belonging to minorities, making it appear as if they always had power? The design of a fair educational policy affecting early childhood, say K-12, and the post-secondary education both in the US and internationally is critical in order to ensure the correct development of cognitive processes and critical thinking.